This video is going to present you with some of the design tips when it comes to creating a PowerPoint. You want to make sure that it can be engaging for your audience, that you present the information that you want, and your audience members can walk away feeling like they have gained the information that they need. So to do this, I'm just going to reference our online tutorial site that we have been using called GCF Global. And so if you go to edu.gcfglobal.org, then you can scroll down and click on the Technology tab. And from there, you're going to see PowerPoint. So if the videos that I've given you aren't clear, if you want more information on things, if you just click on the PowerPoint link, you can see the basics, creating an opening presentation, saving them, and then slide basics, text basics, applying themes, transitions, how to organize your slides, using find and replace. And then if you have lists of things, if you want to work with your indents and spacing, how to insert pictures and modify those pictures, how to format those pictures. If you're wanting to use shapes, if you're wanting to use different objects, if you want to align things, if you want to animate your text. Some of you might want to go a step further, or maybe you already know how, or maybe you want to learn. How do you insert a video? How do you insert audio? You're required to use some sort of an object like tables, charts, smart art graphics. You need to make sure that you always run a spelling and grammar check and then review your presentation. So those are just the basic little tutorials that they have out there. I'm going to click back on the browser and go to the PowerPoint tips section. So what I want to do is go through some of these simple rules for better PowerPoint presentations. So again, maybe you've heard that more is not always better. When you're delivering a PowerPoint presentation in the real world, you're going to be using it as a guide for the information that you want to talk about to your particular audience. You should always know before you create a PowerPoint who your audience is going to be. Anybody can read directly off the slides. You usually want just some bulleted point topics to be able to engage your audience, and then you're going to present them with some more information. Please keep in mind that this PowerPoint is maybe a little different, and so there may be some modifications. But just some general rules of thumb are to follow the 5-5-5 rule. And so what that basically says is you should have 5 words of line per text, 5 lines of text per slide, or 5 text-heavy slides in a row. Those are the things that you should avoid. So you may have some slides that are text heavy, but just don't put 5 of them in a row. So if you can keep them to 5 lines and 5 words, that's great. In our particular case, we may have to put a little bit more text on some of the slides. Again, don't forget who your audience is. The About Me presentation can be very jovial, lighthearted. It can be fun. When you're doing one for work, again, think about your audience. Does it need to be professional? You wouldn't want to do something unprofessional in front of a group of colleagues, or if you're selected to present at a conference, you're representing yourself and you want to make sure that you leave that good impression. So just make sure you think about that audience. Readable colors and fonts. I can't tell you how many times I've seen like red text, or I should say a black background with red text. That is so difficult to read. Or when you're using some neon colors on some very deep colored backgrounds. If you're going to use a light colored background, you want a darker colored text. And so these are good examples of that. These are bad. It's kind of hard to read neon pink on like forest green. And these are just absolutely terrible. You have this bright background with this text on that is a weird, difficult to read font. And in this one, this word actually says awful. I can't tell you how many times I had to look at that slide to actually see what that slide says. So please be careful when you're creating your PowerPoints that you're using good font information on that PowerPoint. Don't overload your presentation with animations. I talked about that in the transition animation video. A couple of animations is fine, or being consistent with your animations is fine. Please do not ever animate every object on a slide. And the other question is, it says, does it necessarily delay the information? Would the information be just as strong if I didn't have an effect? If your answer to either question is yes, then leave out the effect. So on the slide that I showed you where I animated the resume picture, probably didn't even need to animate that, but just trying to prove a point. So make sure that you use those sparingly. The next tutorial talks a little bit about how to make a PowerPoint, look really good. You don't want it to just be good, you want it to be great. So I want you to take a look at these placeholders and I want you to just say to yourself, okay, so which one tells me what it is that I need to know? So you might think that these placeholders are kind of small, but the point is that you can put some text alongside your pictures, but it can also take away from your presentation. So in this case, this is okay, like for an intro slide, and then you can follow up with another slide with your information after it. This slide isn't terrible. People are going to kind of lose out on this. This is probably more effective. You have to make sure too that if you're going to use this type of format, that the image has to be large enough, because if you expand that image on your background, you don't want it to be pixelated. So make sure that it doesn't look like it's stretched out. You want to make sure that it's proportional and that it's not blurry. And if it is blurry, then you need to, by all means, not use that image, because you will receive a deduction if your pictures are not good, crisp, and clear. So this is just a suggestion. There's honestly nothing wrong with this particular slide. If it were me creating this presentation, I would use this slide to introduce the topic. Then I would move on to a slide like this where I'm maybe showing that picture again, but then going through the bullet points of the things that they can expect to do for their summer programs. Interesting fonts. Again, I showed you and talked to you how to use themes, how your headings and titles are larger than the bulleted points in your items. Bulleted points look better in terms of presenting text than just paragraphs and paragraphs of information. There are websites like DaFont, Font Squirrel, etc., where you can go out and find some unique fonts, but again, you need to make sure that you use those sparingly and make sure that they're appropriate. When you're creating color schemes, make sure that you're pulling from themes where the colors work together. Don't be using, like I said, neon themes on really dark backgrounds. So that's just a little bit of an FYI in terms of working with design. Remember, we talked about when you're working with themes, you can use variations of themes. Don't be afraid to use some variants. I focused on the organic theme. Don't use excessively complicated transitions. It might look awesome, like I said, if you've got something that's shattering. Think about adding a sound to the transition. If you add a chime on every transition, every time a slide goes from 1 to 2 to 3, you're going to hear pring, pring, pring. That becomes annoying and distracting. So you want to make sure that you use things that are appropriate. And it's like it says, there's no hard and fast rule for picking transitions, but you really do want to be consistent with the transitions as slides are moving from one slide to the next. Okay, the last thing is just, use the skill sets that you've learned from working with Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. You can use the format painter so that you can enhance things more quickly and it doesn't have to take you so long. The one thing that I never ever want to see on someone's PowerPoint is I never ever want to see a slide that is nothing but pictures. This slide tells me absolutely nothing. There are no captions under the slide. There's no title under the slide. That's an example of a really bad slide. Okay, so just one more thing to talk about. Here's a quick PowerPoint that I threw together of things maybe you shouldn't do. It's about the hometown. The image looks good, the title looks good. I come over here. This is nothing more than an image on a slide. This is not an example of a good slide. It's not cropped well. There's no title on the slide. Things are cut off. It's just not a good example. This is not how you do a PowerPoint slide. And just know, I can see things like this. So don't think that, okay, I'm going to do this in a hurry to get by with something. This actually came off of the City of White Lake's website. On this particular slide, you know, not really abiding by the 5 by 5 by 5 rule. However, to make sure that people can understand the information, it's okay. Spellcheck was run on this. You can see I did not add subwatershed to the dictionary. I did not add Coteau to the dictionary, so they still show up with red wavy lines. You should not see any spelling errors in your PowerPoint presentation. Another thing, this image isn't the best because it wasn't cropped fully around. Either leave a nice border around the whole image or crop out the colored portions. On this particular slide, again, examples of spelling errors. There's way too much text on this slide. If you're going to have 5 slides in a row. If you're talking about one slide, you're talking about those bullet points. One thing you might do is do a continued and break those bullet points up onto separate slides. Again, not the best example of an image. This is a horrible, terrible, ugly slide for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's all pictures. I've had students argue the point, well, you can see this is the White Lake Medical Clinic. You can see this is City Hall. This is a terrible picture. This is what I mean by pixelated. If I go to make this image larger or smaller, it's blurry, it's grainy, not an example of a good picture that should be in your PowerPoint. These pictures need to have captions under them. Insert text boxes, put captions under them. There needs to be a title on here. Here's an example of a placeholder. I should not see placeholders that are not being used. You need to click on empty placeholders and delete those. And then lastly, what's the point of this slide? Look forward to seeing you soon. There needs to be something else on here for a concluding slide. Be creative. Add some pictures. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with what it says, but really, what's the point of the slide? There needs to be something else on here to conclude it or wrap it up. This PowerPoint, if I were to go check animations on it, I would pull up the animation pane and I would see that there's animation on the first slide and then there's no animation on the rest of the slides, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just want you to see how I would check that. If I were checking transitions, I would click on that and then I would just arrow down through the slides and I went from reveal to none to none to none to none to none. All slides have to have a transition. If I were going to check the slide layout, I would click on a slide, I would click on the layout, there's a title slide. I would double click on this slide, it's a title and content. Here's 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 a title and content. If you have to use 3 different slide layouts in your presentation, then you need to make sure that you're using 3 different slide layouts. I could simply go to this slide, I could go to the layout, and I could change it to blank. And then I'd have to rearrange my images. But then I met the criteria of 3 different layouts. So with that, you know, the other thing this presentation is missing, doesn't have a footer on it anywhere. Aren't any extra objects. I had someone say, well, that's kind of a graphic or a chart. No, it's a table or chart or smarter that you create, not a picture that you take from a website. This has a picture here and it has pictures here. So yes, it has, you know, 3 pictures, which you're required to do. The criteria also says you can add extra elements like clip art if you want. These could be considered clip art. Hopefully this helps you understand good PowerPoint design.